If you want the best United and Stormwind decks, you've come to the right place. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of 17 different decks, as well as their dust costs, so you know if they will fit your budget. And without further ado, let's just jump into it. Don't forget to like the video and answer the question of the day. So the first deck on this list is Quest Demon Hunter, and basically what you want to do with this deck is you want to draw a ton of cards to finish your quest. Once you finish your quest, your cards will be reduced in cost by about 2, and then you want to draw your cards like Cthulhu Pieces, Illidari Inquisitor, and then obviously a finished Cthulhu late game to finish your opponent off. And you can use cards like Glide to beat control or combo matchups, and you can use your lifesteal and removal like the Warblades and Chaos Leech to help you beat aggro matchups. Overall, this deck is only 4,400 dust, so if you are on a budget, I think that this deck will be great for you, and I think it'll probably be the best Demon Hunter deck when the expansion first drops. The next deck on this list is Quest Druid, which is honestly a much better deck than people give credit for. Basically, you want to give your hero as much attack as possible with cards like Pounce, Feral Rage, and Moon-Touched Amulet in order to finish your quest. Once you finish your quest, you'll get an 8/8 beast with taunt that'll give you 8 attack and 8 armor for the turn. You might not think this sounds like a lot when a lot of the other quests are like reduce the cost of cards in your deck by 2 for the rest of the game, or gain +3 spell damage permanently, but the 16 health swing turn immediately is actually huge, especially when you use cards like Mark of the Spike Shell and Northshire Farmer to copy this effect. You can ultimately do like 30 to 48 damage if you fully max this out, and this doesn't even include the other damage from Feral Rage and Moon-Touched Amulet. It's a really solid deck. It's less than 5,000 dust, so if you want a good budget deck, this is a good deck for you. So the next deck on this list is Big Spell Druid, which basically revolves around the new legendary Sheldress Moon Tree, which says the next 3 spells you draw are cast when drawn. You then combo that with Primordial Protector to guaranteed draw you Survival of the Fittest, and next thing you know no longer have to be vulnerable on turn 5 to play Survival of the Fittest, which is a lot of the times a big problem with Druid. You'll play this on turn 10, and ultimately that would be your turn. So now you can do that for free while developing a board with Primordial Protector, and then you can play Scrapyard Colossus later on to corrupt the Carnival Clown, so you still have a way to corrupt it. And other than that, it's basically still the same ramp package where you go Wild Growth, Overgrowth, tons of beasts with the guardian animals, and Cenarian Ward for some survivability. It's also about 8,000 dust, so it might be a little bit expensive, but it looks pretty fun. So next we have Elwyn Boar in order to get the Sword of 1,000 Truths, and I think this is going to be the most reliable Elwyn Boar deck because you have a lot of ways of copying it with things like Pack Tactics, Selective Breeder, Shando, Northshire Farmer, and Dire Frenzy, and Terran Gorefiend, as well as decent draw with Barrack, Cornelius, Warsong Wrangler, Scavenger's Ingenuity, and Tracking. So you have a very consistent way of getting this combo off, and you basically just play Elwyn Boars and pump them to apply a little bit of pressure, and then eventually, after they try to wipe them a ton of times, then you just kill him with a giant sword. It's pretty fun. It's actually a pretty consistent combo, but it is about 10,000 dust, so definitely don't do this if you are short on dust. So next on the list is Quest Hunter, or Raza Hunter, whatever you want to call it, and essentially what this does is when you finish your quest, your hero power becomes a 0 mana, deal 2 that refreshes every time you play a spell. So you run a ton of cheap spells in this deck in order to try to refresh it as much as possible, and basically combo your opponent to death. The only issue I had with this deck was you could sometimes run out of resources pretty quickly, so I threw in Malygos, I threw in Lock and Load, Resizing Pouch, and Barrack in order to give you a little bit more of a consistent draw, so that way you won't run out of resources as quickly. And even if the Lock and Load doesn't end up giving you a ton of spells, at least you'll have some minions to apply pressure to the board as well. Overall, I think this is going to be the best Hunter deck of all the Hunter decks, and it's only about 6,500 dust, so it's relatively cheap as well. Next is Rat Hunter, which is a little bit cheaper, but I think a little bit worse than Quest Hunter, and the reason is because the board that you're going to develop, although wide and very consistent, is also going to be pretty small with a ton of little 1/1s. Yes, Scavenging Hyena, along with the Traveling Merchant, along with the Rat King, all benefit from wide boards that could potentially die, but the only issue is, if your board gets wiped before you're able to play one of those cards, you lose a lot of the benefit. All that being said though, the deck still looks fun. The combos with the Rat King where you just constantly resummon him over and over and over again look like they'll be pretty good as well. And I actually have a lot of hope for the deck despite the fact that it might lose to some good AoE from like Priest, Warlock, Shaman, or Warrior. So next on the list is Quest Mage, and there are two ways you can play this. You can play it no minion mage, so take out Antonidas, and run 2 Apexis Blasts and 2 Font of Powers. I recommend taking out 2 arcane spells, 1 fire spell, and Antonidas for this. Or you could run it this way, which I think is a little bit better, because Antonidas gives you a really good late game win condition where you can cast 3 fireballs. And if you play this after you finish your quest, every fireball is going to do minimum 9 damage, which is pretty sick. The only issue with this deck, though, is the fact that it's very inconsistent to get the frost spells because you only run 5, but throwing in the ice barrier, so that way you can just have a frost spell to throw out at some point, is pretty good, and you can always discover some of them off of the runed orb. Then, once you finish your quest, you want to burn down your opponent with fireball, ignite, and whatever ruined orbs you have left as your main win condition in the late game, also with Antonidas. So next is Hand Buff Paladin, which is basically just a more aggressive version of Rush Warrior, where the idea is you want to play a couple of minions early, and then pump up a ton of minions in your hand while drawing a couple of extra minions along the way, and then playing in the mid game to basically overwhelm your opponent. I think that this deck is better than Rush Warrior in the sense that you have more consistent 1-drops, so you're not going to fall behind on the board early. You also have a little bit more draw than Rush Warrior, which means that you're going to pump up more things. The only issue is the late game with Rush Warrior I think is a little bit better because of things like Troublemaker. That being said, Varian, Cornelius, and the High Lord all really help with your late game by giving you good pump, good draw, and a giant minion on the board. So overall, it's just a mid-game deck. However, it is 1200 dust, so if you are playing on a budget, I would not recommend this unless it ends up being ridiculously broken. So the cheaper Paladin deck that I would recommend is Quest Paladin, where basically you want to play a ton of 1-drops to upgrade your hero power and make you summon 2 Silverhand Recruits as 3/3s for 2 mana every turn. The idea is you also want to play Lothraxion to give them Divine Shield, and Pursuit of Justice to give them +1 attack, and just have those be your win conditions late game, along with Stand Against Darkness and Day at the Fair. Late game, Cornelius obviously will draw you a ton of cards, and the Lady Prester will turn whatever minions you still have into your deck into dragons, which is pretty cool, and it gives you a solid-ish late game once you finish off your combo with your dudes. Overall, I think this deck looks really fun. It's what I hoped Dude Paladin would have been in the past, and now it looks like it's going to be really, really strong. So the next deck on this list is the one that not only was I most excited to play of like every single deck except for maybe one other, but it's also really cheap at 5,000 dust. It can also be made cheaper by taking out Soul Mirror because it doesn't really fit the deck because this deck is very aggressive, but I'd still recommend putting it in because Soul Mirror is arguably one of the best cards ever printed. So if you have it, put it in, but if not, it's no big deal. The idea of this deck is you want to just play Shadow spells to do damage to your opponent with things like Psyfiend, your new weapon, Shadow Spirit, and Void Shard, while also hitting them with your new hero power that just does 2 damage every time you activate it, which is pretty solid. And then you have a couple of ways of discovering spells, discovering Death Rattle minions, and regenerating some of your dead minions to push more damage later on. It looks really fun, and I'm very excited to play it. Next is Quest Rogue, which is a deck that I think looks pretty interesting. The idea of this deck is to play like Miracle Rogue, ideally, where you play a lot of things really quickly, draw a ton of cards, get some good effects, and when you finish your quest and activate other, quest lines along this quest, you will get really cheap, high value cards that will allow you to continue comboing and doing damage. The only issue with this deck is that once you hit late game, you are going to lose, but you will be very, very fast in the early and mid game, so you want to close this out quickly. It's kind of an aggro deck in the sense that it's very fast, but it's also not an aggro deck in the sense that it's not as board centric. It's more draw cards and play a ton of cheap things that can sometimes do damage or draw you extra cards. So overall, this deck looks really fun. It's only about 5,000 dust, and I'd give it a chance if you get the quest. This next one's a homebrew that's 11,000 dust, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but basically it takes the shuffle aspect I've always wanted to be good with Ticketmaster, Malevolent Strike, Grand Empress, and Cthulhu, and supports it a little bit more with things like Sketchy Informant to help trigger Ticketmaster, along with the new weapon Counterfeit Dagger to copy the Death Rattle of Ticketmaster again, and just shuffle a ton of minions into your deck, while also running things like Field Contact, Swindle, Prize Plunder, and Grand Empress to draw as many cards as humanly possible, which can be very, very strong. You also have the Garrett in order to just do some damage to your opponent, which can be nice and allow you to finish him off a little bit sooner. Honestly, I'm really excited for this deck. I don't know if it'll be good or not. This is a hit or miss, and it's expensive, but I'm excited. So the next deck on this list is Quest Shaman, which actually gives there a reason to have Overload in the game, which is pretty cool. So basically, you want to play as many Overload cards as possible, 7 in total to finish your quest, and then once you do, your spells will double activate. You want to Overload for your quest, but it also synergizes well with Overdraft, which does more damage based on how many Overload crystals you have and unlocks them. Charged Call, which gives you a minion of a cost of 1, plus however many Overload cards you've played this game, and because it pumps up the Unbound Elemental. But once you finish your quest, you want to play Brucan along with whatever spells you can in order to finish your opponent off. So Brucan, double activate Lightning Bolt is 24 damage right there, and not including any other damage you're able to do throughout the game. So overall, I think that this deck looks pretty promising, and it's relatively affordable at 7,000 dust. So if you get the quest, feel free to try it out. Okay, so this is the most complicated deck on this list, so I'm going to take the time to explain how the OTK is going to work, but this is OTK Shaman. First, it is just a control deck that revolves around cards like Tidal Surge, Canal Slugger, along with Dunk Tank and Tidal Wave to clear the board as well as heal you up. But here's what the combo is. You want to corrupt cards like Circus Medic and Dunk Tank and then play them. And then on turn 10, you want to play the new legendary Bolner Hammerbreaker, Lightning Bloom, and then play Yashiraj. Hammerbreaker says the very first Battlecry you play will have its effect reactivated every time you play a new Battlecry minion. So if you play Yashiraj and then get a Circus Medic, every time you play Circus Medic, it's just going to give you more Circus Medics. So you can essentially go infinite with this card and do an infinite amount of damage to your opponent based on how much time you have. You can also play Dunk Tanks as well, but Circus Medic is the other Battlecry minion that will copy Yashiraj's Battlecry and ultimately lead to an infinite combo, which is absolutely crazy. Next, we have Quest Warlock, which I thought was going to be built a little bit differently, but after experimenting a little bit, I think that this is the best build. At first, I thought it was going to be mill as many cards as you possibly can by ticketing yourself, along with Altar Firing yourself as well, so that way you can get to fatigue and kill your opponent quickly. The issue with that is you don't have a lot of healing and control spells, so I scrapped that idea and threw in other cards like Siphon Soul, Touch of the Nathrazim, Bloodshard Bristleback, and a ton of other just control cards that would help me survive, rather than get to fatigue really fast. So that way I wouldn't just die to aggro decks, which would have sucked. So overall, I think this is the best build. Raise Dead also works well because you don't have that many minions and you can make copies of the Bloodshard Bristleback or Spice Bread Baker, which can heal you even more, while also doing damage to yourself, getting you closer to the quest. Then you just want to kill him with fatigue and hero powering and you're all set. Next is Hand Warlock, which is just basically Control Warlock, but with you wanting a big hand size. So you have cards like Spice Bread Baker to heal you up a bunch, Entitled Customer to do a ton of damage to the entire board, and just a lot of good control cards in general, and Soul Fragment, so that way you can continuously heal throughout the game. The only difference with this and the quest is that your win condition isn't the quest, it's Ticketus, Sociologist, Lord Draxus, and Yashiraj. So it's again basically old Control Warlock with a couple of the new cards that give you a good mid-game, Power Spike with good removal, and Dark Alley Pact, which can give you a 9/9 Elemental turn 4 if you draw enough cards. So overall, I think that this deck looks pretty solid. It takes what Warlock already did well and does it even better. However, it is about 9,000 dust, so it might be a little bit hard to craft. Next is a N'Zoth Warrior that was created by No Hands Gamer, and I think it looked pretty cool, so I'm putting it on here. Essentially, it's a control warrior that uses the quest as a late game win condition to go infinite. You're basically endlessly going to generate 1 pirate, 1 weapon, and do 4 damage once you finish the quest, which is pretty good. But then you just basically control the board with taunts, weapons, removal like Rancor Barov and Brawl, along with good taunt and rush minions like Scrap Golem, Tent Trasher, Kresh, and the new demon Morag Forge Fiend, which gives you 8 armor when it dies. And then your other late game win condition is just playing N'Zoth, right? Playing N'Zoth to refill your board with a ton of minions, which means that most decks won't be able to deal with. But yeah, basically you have 2 main win conditions, Infinite Value and N'Zoth, as well as being really, really good control-wise. And the last deck on this list is Pirate Warrior, just the aggro style, where basically you want to finish the quest as quickly as possible with tons of pirates and just constantly put pressure on the board. You have good draw with the Outrider's Axe, Cutting Class, Stonewall Anchorman, the actual quest itself, which will draw you a weapon, and the Harbor Scamp, which will draw you a pirate. And then you want to close out the game with your weapons, things like Nitro Boost, and completing the quest, which actually does a lot of damage. And your weapons are going to do a lot of damage too, just because like the Outrider's Axe is actually 9 damage if you add it all up, which is pretty sick. So overall, very excited to try this one out. 4,400 dust, so it's great on a budget. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. It helps me a ton. If you want me to play any of these decks in particular, please tell me in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to prioritize some of these decks. And if there are any decks you think I missed, also please let me know. These are just the ones that I thought would be the most fun, but I'm sure that there are other decks out there. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.